Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This evening you are invited to attend this open college forum with our distinguished guest, Adam Smith. He will be discussing his philosophies with our eminent economists, William Ligon, Tim Folsom, Ty Edwards, and myself. Towards the end of our program, we will welcome questions from the audience. I will begin the questioning. Dr. Smith, you say man is a creature of self-interest. Explain your reasoning for this.
Well, as John Locke explained very simply, each individual is as an atom, a sovereignty unto himself. That is, each individual is a reflection of each sovereign piece in nature. There is no sense of beneficence. There is no sense of social union with other individuals. Each seeks to obey the law of survival. In the case of man, man seeks his survival in union with other men simply because that is the best way to guarantee his sustenance.
Dr. Smith, you claim that the interest of society will be promoted in an economic system in which each individual is allowed to pursue his own self-interest without any government interference. Do you not foresee exploitation of the working class by the owners of industry who will be primarily concerned with their own interest? Will not the emphasis then be on getting the most out of the worker at the least expense to the owner? How then could such a system, which benefits a few and ignores the rest, promote the interest of the whole of society?
No, not at all. I don't see that occurring at all. You have to understand, certainly, that my books on moral sentiment and wealth of nations deals with what society should be rather than what society truly is. It is perhaps a goal, it is perhaps a book to inform and enlighten people. But you have to understand that human society is part of the natural order. For man, that natural order is reflected in the social order. And the pursuit of wealth is simply a part of that social order. Order would be based upon three words, as I would indicate. One would be prudence, the second would be justice, and the third would be beneficence. Now, by prudence, I mean that each and every individual must obey the law of nature and seek his own survival. And he seeks his own survival through the quest of knowledge rather than through hitherto existing ignorance. And in this way, his abilities and his talents are best applied in the manner in which he himself can understand. Knowing the good from the bad, he will obviously choose the good, for that is in his own interest. However, in the exercise of prudence, he cannot pursue his own self-interest at the expense of other individuals who are pursuing their own self-interest, for that would create a conflict which would be detrimental to his well-being. So justice is also a requirement in which each pursuant of self-interest must take into account and not trespass upon that area of self-interest of fellow individual. What this means is that one must also then take into account beneficence. For as one individual pursues his self-interest and must not be at the expense of others, so others cannot pursue their self-interest at the expense of that individual. There must be, therefore, moderation. There must be limitation, otherwise one would have complete disorder, which is unnatural.
So this moderation is supposed to be on the part of the individual owner. He is supposed to regulate himself so that he does not exploit the others.
Ah, I see what you're talking about. No. You misinterpret my book. There are not three different types of people in society: the entrepreneur, the laborer, and the purchaser of commodities. These are really one individual who functions in life are divided into three. The entrepreneur is a consumer no less than he is a businessman. The worker, the laborer, is an entrepreneur because he himself has a product to sell, and that is his labor. His labor is no less a commodity. The laborer is also a consumer. So everyone, in one manner, shape, or another, as you say in modern days, is entrepreneurial, is a laborer, and is a consumer. They are, and they assume these identities at different times and at different values, but nevertheless, the system, the economic polity, the order of things does not exist outside the bounds of the social order, which includes certainly ethics, morality, politics, and the like. Were the system to operate for the benefit of one at the expense of others, well, obviously prudence would be violated, justice would be violated, and would be to the benefit of no one. And therefore you would have a society that exists in ignorance and which is not operating to the self-interest of every individual. If what you paint were to happen, it would be that I would maintain the consequence of ignorance, not the consequence of the obedience of the economic order of nature.
Don't you think that the economic system should show how a given nation can best direct, regulate, and restrict the economy of individuals in the interest of the greatest possible national power and prosperity?
But who would know what would be in the best interest of the individual more than the individual himself? Who would know? Who would be in a better position to make a judgment between that which is good and that which is bad for his own interest? Well, certainly the individual. That government of which you speak, the nation of which you speak, is composed of individuals. And certainly being removed from the area of an individual, not being proprietors to his enterprise, their decisions certainly are not any more valid than would be that individual. What these nations must do is to create an environment which is conducive to the pursuit of the self-interest of that individual, which will in turn therefore contribute benevolently to the strength and the vitality of the government which is needed to protect the individual. Individual is important, utmost important.
Dr. Smith, could you please explain your theory that the source of all wealth is the labor of the people who produce it?
Oh, indeed. The mercantilists would have you believe that there is a fixed amount of wealth in the world, that the acquisition of wealth by one party would leave a lesser sum of acquisition by another party. In that context, one merely barters back and forth a fixed amount. But fixed amounts certainly are not indicated in the nature of existence. For the whole of nature, if one looks out, is boundless, perhaps infinite, as some would suggest, the astronomer Herschel, for example, and even the eminent Immanuel Kant. Therefore, if the whole of nature is boundless or infinite, would it not seem strange that that which exists on earth is finite and limited? The physiocrats would have you believe that the wealth exists in the land, and that whatever is produced from the land is merely a gift of God. The consequence of man really is insignificant. But the true value of any given product is the amount of time and energy, the talent, and the ability that an individual introduces into that particular commodity, be he artisan, be he craftsman, be he entrepreneur. The clothing which you wear contains the values of individuals. The seamstress, the weaver, the spinner, the shepherd, the man who sowed the seed which root into the grass that the sheep graze. All of these values derive from labor, which allow for an exchange of commodities using a monetary currency as opposed to merely simple barter.
Dr. Smith, what keeps a community in which everyone is basically looking out for himself, his own self-interest, from completely falling apart?
That very self-interest that each individual seeks. Again, the natural order in the physical world merely reflects on a larger scale the social order of that which is man. As the Greeks used to say, man is a universe made small. And this social order then can be divided into interrelated, distinct but inseparable orders. The political order, the economic order, the moral order. It is the individual who is not enlightened. It is the individual who does not seek out the model for life's existence in nature, who suggests that each individual is out for himself. Indeed, however, it is in his better self-interest to associate with man in a society according to the lines dictated by prudence, justice, benevolence. And that indeed, while society is an association of sovereign individuals, these sovereign individuals, through their learning, recognize that they live in communion with each other, which is to each advantage. And it is the purpose of government to act as arbiter when there occurs an unintentional trespass on the pursuit of each other's interest. It is a self-regulating machine, you see, where that invisible hand sweeps across the breadth of society and demands that order be kept.
But wouldn't this self-interest bring about higher prices?
Nay, nay. For this invisible hand is a self-regulating mechanism. It is a machine, as Isaac Newton indicated. For the predominant regulation is the law of supply and demand. An individual cannot supply what is not demanded, and an individual cannot demand what cannot be supplied. Therefore, the law of supply and demand ensures a maintenance of reasonable quality of a commodity, a reasonable availability of a commodity, a reasonable price for a commodity, that is to the self-interested benefit of all those involved in the distribution of that commodity that is produced. The entrepreneur, the laborer, the consumer, who, as I suggested earlier, are actually three in one. It is somewhat, if you may, a new trinity, as it were.
Well, suppose then that there are periods of recession and unemployment when this self-regulating economy cannot right itself. Shouldn't there be some government intervention then to help put the economy back on its feet?
Nay. The purpose of government is, as Francois Quesnay said in France, laissez-faire, laissez-passer. Let them alone, let them do it. Let government create simply the environmental conditions that is conducive to the pursuit of the individual's self-interest. Roads, turnpikes, harbors, to ensure free trade and free movement of peoples and capital and various raw commodities, not only within the society but between and amongst society. Contrary to the mercantilist theories, admittedly, perhaps not to the liking of kings and princes, but we are talking about the truth of nature, prudence. If there is a failure, if the pursuit of self-interest does not result in accumulation of capital, in profit, in success? Is that not a learning process in and of itself? Does that not indicate to this particular individual that what he judged to be true was indeed false and truly ignorant? And therefore he has learned the truth of his ignorance, and therefore knows not to choose that path to walk again. Were it to be any other way, then those in ignorance, those who misapply their talents, the misguided ones, would be protected, and society would continue in the corruption of ignorance and lie, as had occurred during those times when the mists of darkness, as Diderot described, enveloped and blinded society.
You speak of individuals trading with individuals, and this promotes the self-interest of everyone. Well, when individuals trade with large industries, these industries can hedge themselves against against the influence of the market forces. Is it not reasonable to assume that some government controls should be there to protect the individual from the powerful industries?
Government acts as an arbitrator. When the actions of an individual encroach and trespass upon the actions of another individual, then government merely arbitrates and resets the mechanism. In terms of protection, of course not. Indeed not. That would be a violation of the economic order of society. You cannot have an economic order without a social order. There can be the true economic order that follows the dictates of nature must indeed be imbued with the morality and the ethic of the social order that is a copy of nature. It must guarantee those inalienable rights of liberty
But
and
you ignore a basic inequality. You have a simple, weak individual here and a powerful industry here. The industry will overcome the individual.
But that powerful individual must rely upon that weak individual. That large industry is used, I'm not familiar with that term, relies upon that weak individual. For that large industry purchases the labor of that individual. It is the individual's ignorance not to realize that he has a commodity at his disposal, and therefore is not pursuing his own self-interest to making that commodity available at a reasonable price, which is conducive to prudence, to justice, and benevolence. That large, what was that term you used? Industry. That industry is nothing more than a group of workers. It is nothing more than an entrepreneur purchasing the labor of these workers. And here too, the laws of supply and demand require that there will be mechanisms that balance out. If you're asking that everyone reap equality and equal results, nay. If you are asking that every individual achieve that which is his due, certainly, but not at the benefit of others. It should not be as that, providing all obey the economic order of nature, which is but a part of the social order. You must remember that. A man cannot pursue individual self-interest. A man cannot be free unless he is totally free to achieve life in all of its aspects, liberty in all of its joys, and happiness in all of its securities and freedom from wants. One might say, if I were Benjamin Franklin at Colonial, that food for thought wants food for the stomach. One must have both in order to be creative and to think.
Dr. Schmier, why do you feel that the physiocratic or agricultural system is closer to the truth on the subject of political economy than the mercantile policy?
Oh, Simply, if you read Francois Quesnay in his Tablique économique, he demands the abolition of all of the restrictions, all of the limitations imposed upon the possession of land, on the purchasing of land, on the management of land. Laissez-faire, laissez-passer, he argued. Let them alone. Let them use the land. Let the land be purchased by those who can produce it with greater ease. Let them who operate it and manage it, who can increase the yields. Now, he is wrong in saying that the produce of the land are gifts of God, of which the labors of man are inconsequential. But the possession of land is somewhat like thievery, because only the nobility can own land, be they fops or otherwise. They care not for what the land produces. They merely care for the authority, the prestige, the glory, and the honor derived from the land. But is possession of land indicative of one's talent and one's ability? Nay. It is merely a protection, and it is not in the interest of the individual. The foppish duke, methinks, feels that he is far superior to the ignorant, lonely peasant because he purchases and owns land. And yet it is the peasant who produces the food which the duke consumes at his lavish tables in the midst of his banquets. Now, each is deluded into believing that one is better and one is lesser, based not upon talent and ability, but simply based upon simple ownership of land, which is guaranteed to some and excluded to others. So, let everyone be free to purchase land. Let everyone be free to own land. Let everyone be free to manage land without distinction, without discrimination. Let each demonstrate his true abilities and his true talents determined by the produce yielded from the land, which would be, for Quesnay, the source of wealth, which in turn would contribute to the vitality of the society. Quesnay is correct as far as he goes. However, he still retains certain mercantilist ideas about bartering and about the sources of wealth and the nature of the political economy. But he, nevertheless, is quite right in arguing that the individual should be allowed to pursue his self-interest in purchasing the land upon which the majority of wealth and position now rests.
Dr. Smith, you have stated that the only function of government is in laissez-faire. Well, then how does society manage to get those tasks done that are necessary for survival without any central planning and without any influence, any authority?
It is a self-regulating mechanism. Simply the obedience of the economic order as it operates with the social order, whereby one applies the natural order and the natural law to guarantee the exercise of natural rights. The exercise of natural rights by one individual must recognize the limitation in order to allow for the exercise of natural rights of another individual. It is only when there is an inadvertent trespass that government would come in and indicate from whence this trespass came and how the subsequent dispute should be resolved. But who, I ask you, who better would know what must be done to obey the laws of nature, to pursue self-interest according to prudence, justice, and benevolence, than that individual seeking his improvement, than that individual, that person himself? Wherein is the role of distant government? And who shall plan? And in whose interest shall such plans, central planning as you indicate, be formulated. According to the planner, what you ask is the old mercantilist philosophy that has proven itself to be bankrupt, proven itself unable to adjust to the new requirements, to the new demands, to make room for the new thinking, the new experimentation that has proven that it is simply a cover to protect the self-interest of the monarch, the king and his selected court, at the expense and without due deliberation to the majority of the people.
Earlier you said, when we were discussing the relations between individuals and industries, you said that to protect themselves, the workers could come together and associate against the industry. But earlier, you've maintained that such guilds or associations by workers are harmful because they result in unequal distribution of income and discrimination towards non-members. But wouldn't the advantages gained by these associations, such as better pay and working conditions, far outweigh the disadvantages?
You must understand that when I wrote that book, the predominant system was an association of craftsmen and artisans. They were called guilds. And these guilds essentially held to the monopoly of the manufacture of whatever product they were concerned. Butcher's Guild, the Tailor's Guild, the Shoemaker's Guild, and so on. And when those guilds were formed, they served a benevolent purpose. For the dangers, the risks of entrepreneurship was such that there had to be a measure of protections. And they were established in order to guarantee within limited ability and within their limited knowledge, equitable return on the capital of each artisan and craftsman, while yielding equitable quality, quantity, and price of their commodity. However, they have since sunk into a self-interested coterie, a group, which is not operating to the benefit of the society. They care not for quality, they care not for quantity, they care not for price that is both judicious, prudent, and benevolent to themselves and the whole of society. They care for themselves at the expense of others. They have become a blockade
Well, then they're
to change.
They're following what you have advocated.
Nay,
Pursuit of self-interest.
nay, but their prudence can only operate within the confines of justice. Prudence, justice, benevolence.
Well, then
They
what?
pursue their own individual self-interest while not detrimental to others in order to establish progress for themselves, which contributes to the progress for the whole of society.
Well, then don't we need a regulatory body, a governmental body to make sure that they don't
Nay, the
harm
law
society?
the law of supply and demand, free enterprise, free competition will allow for this. You see, with the guild, there was no free enterprise. There was no free competition. Only they and they alone could permit an individual to engage in their enterprise.
If government doesn't break the guild up, who will?
The law of supply and demand will. If the guild indeed trespasses on the individual, then indeed the government should create that environment that is conducive to the operation of free enterprise and free competition. If such an institution is detrimental to the institution of these laws, then it is government's responsibility to dissolve this institution, to tear down the barricade and allow for the free flow of enterprise and competition according to the laws of the economic
So
order.
then there must be some government intervention in the economy.
Government creates an environment. There is no institution that is a part of society that is disengaged, that is disinterested. Government creates the environment. that allows for the operation of free enterprise and free competition according to the social order. Were it to occur, as I said earlier, that this balance of moderation, this harmony of peoples, becomes somewhat imbalanced, then indeed that is largely because of a violation of either prudence, justice, or benevolence. And government therefore should create the proper environment. If government's responsibility is to build roads and a road is washed out, does the government sit aside? Nay, it goes in and it reconstructs the road in order to allow for the free flow. Again, but it does not say what can travel that road and when it can travel. It merely affords the opportunity, and then lets the individual decide how the road should be used.
What is your source for these qualities, prudence, justice, and benevolence?
Nature, the natural order of things.
How can you be sure that your interpretation is correct?
It is a self-evident truth. Just as the physical laws demonstrated by Newton contain the quality of the divine, so too must all in that universe contain the order, the harmony, and the balance. For if it did not, then the universe would be chaos, totally. So that in the physical, natural order of things, man also abides by a social order. And the economic order is merely the social order being applied in the acquisition of wealth that is conducive to physical survival. That is a self-evident truth. If you wish references, I can give you numerous ones: David Hume, Immanuel Kant, John Locke, Diderot, Condorcet, Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu. These men have since been writing and discussing, and with quite accuracy.
We will now take questions from the audience. If you will, stand up, state your name, and speak clearly. Wait to be recognized. Any questions?
I'm Bill Lindsay. The ideal economics, according to you, appears orderly and well balanced. How could it be ideal and just appear orderly and well balanced?
You are obviously a scholar, young man. I notice the Greek learning on your shirt. The pursuit of the economic order, if done with propriety, if done according to learning and knowledge of that which is dictated by nature, must by its very operation be balanced, harmonious, and moderate. By freedom, by free enterprise and free competition, I do not mean to connote license, unlimited movement, nay, but that is disorder and that is chaos. The true economic order must be merely a material pursuit of wealth that reflects the social order, which in turn is man's reflection of his life in the physical order of the universe. To facilitate the pursuit of an economic polity which is detrimental to members of the society, which is imbalanced, disorderly, lacking harmony, is a reflection of ignorance that must be corrected, that must be replaced by knowledge of the laws of the economic polity. It must, a society was created by the sovereign people for the purpose and for the sole purpose of guaranteeing their survival, of promoting the pursuit of their own self-interest to that end. An individual, therefore, in this society must be totally free in all aspects in all varieties of his life to pursue that self-interest. A person who is not free in the economic polity cannot be free in the social order. They are integral. There must be prudence, justice, and benevolence in all of the order, including the economic order. Situation that exists contrary to that is unnatural, wrong, the consequence of ignorance.
Any other questions?
Excuse me, sir. It's a bad cough happening. Dr. Smith, if I remember my history, the last time a society had a supply and demand economy dated back to the early years of man. I may be wrong, I think I'm not. Would man let himself fall into systems such as the feudal or manorial system if it were not for his own good? See, I believe that as man continues through history, his economy must also mature.
But as one matures, is that a guarantee that the individual will use his attributes for the betterment of himself and others? Indeed not. Were that to be true, he would be all saints. And were we to be all saints, we would be living in a heaven. And were we to be living in a heaven, we need not be talking about disparities between, what was that term used, industry and workers. There is no guarantee that information acquired will be properly converted into knowledge that is then applied in a way that is conducive to self-interest. Hitherto, how could one pursue self-interest when the value of oneself was denied by the church? Éclase la in, said Voltaire. Destroy that infamous thing that would not allow you to believe that you can love yourself. How could you pursue your own individual self-interest if you were duped into believing that there is some mystical presence of evil while God exists and there is an unseen hand swooping down by which man moves and which commands man to obey? The perception and understanding of that unseen hand certainly has been wanting. So therefore, do not confuse movement and change with maturity. Do not confuse the acquisition of little bits and information with knowledge. Do not confuse maturity with improvement and betterment.
We have time for one more question. Any other questions?
Jim Miller, and I want to know, why do you think that labor is both the source and final measure of value? Why not land or money?
Money is a derivative of the person's labor. If you talk about land as the source of wealth, then you go back to the limitations of the physiocrats and the limitations of the mercantilists. How shall you exchange the commodities of a land? What determines how much wheat shall be exchanged for barley? It is whimsical. It is not orderly. There is no consistency. But what can be consistent? What can be a criteria for exchange? But the labor, the toil, and the sweat of the brow that goes into and is a part of, and indeed is the source of the value of a commodity. It is not God who plows the field. It is not God who weeds the furrows. It is not God who reaps the wheat. It is man who breaks the ground, who toils in the field, who deals with the contrivances of nature, and who yields the product of his work. So that what we would call a commodity is the consequence of the labor that a man puts in. It is his toil. And that, you see, becomes the ever-present standard, the ever-present criteria. The value of labor in a commodity remains constant, though the commodity may be different. So underlying this confusion, one can then exchange wheat and barley and fish and whatever commodity you wish, for the common value is determined by the labor that it took to create that commodity, be it grown in the fields, be it hammered in the artisan shop, be it woven in the peasant's cottage, or the like.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes our forum. We would like to thank Dr. Smith
My pleasure, indeed.
for sharing his views with us. Thank you again.